All right, guys. Thank you very much for joining the webinar today, hosted by NAT Global Campus. I am Danny Marks. I'll be your host tonight, but not the star of the show. The star of the show will be Dr. Turner Osler, who, as you can see here, is sharing a screen and will be presenting a very lovely, interesting presentation on active sitting, a concept that I was recently introduced to a few months ago and have implemented in my life and has helped me massively with pelvic pains, back pains, and just being more mindful of my daily actions while sitting. So I really hope you enjoy it. We have Dr. Turner Osler here. His camera is on, presentation ready to go. Dr. Osler, can you give me the okay that you're ready to take the stage?
You bet.
Fantastic. So good luck, everyone. Enjoy, and please stay on and write down any questions that you have, because once the presentation is over, we'll open up the Q&A session where you'll be able to type in some questions to us, and then we'll run through them, as many as we can, as many as time permits. But enjoy and good luck.
Well, good afternoon. My name is Turner Osler. I'm a surgeon and epidemiologist, a statistician, and now, against all odds, an entrepreneur and CEO of a small company. I'm an emeritus professor here at the University of Vermont, where I am in the Department of Surgery and an adjunct faculty in the Department of Mathematics and Statistics. I'm also the CEO of QOR 360, which is a chair project we invented to try and help people sit differently. You can find me at tosler@UVM, University of Vermont.edu, if you want to, get in touch with me for any reason. I'd like to start with a disclaimer. I'm a researcher and I'm interested in the problems caused by active sitting, but I'm also the CEO of a company that's dedicated to trying to change the way people sit. And this is obvious conflict of interest that disquiets me, but it seems unavoidable. As Richard Feynman, a Nobel laureate in physics, observed, the first principle is that you must not fool yourself. And unfortunately, you are the easiest person to fool. So, I've been working on this problem for a while, and so I've developed some prejudices that I hope I'm able to stay objective. A little bit of housekeeping. There's no need to take notes on this unless it helps you listen, because I'm happy to send you an ebook that I've written entitled Sit Better, which we published in 2021. And you can get a copy from me by just emailing me, tosler@uvm.edu. And there's our book. So a quick outline of what I'd like to cover today. And it's really pretty simple. We sit a lot, but unfortunately, we're not designed for sitting. And as a result, we've had a public health emergency. Core atrophy and poor posture has resulted in an immense amount of misery and unhappiness. Back pain is endemic in our Western culture and costs, estimates are as high as $100 billion a year. And finally, sitting disease is epidemic and is actually costing lives. People who sit the most lose as much as 2 life years as a result of all this sitting. And then I'd like to conclude by asking the question, can ergonomic insights mitigate these problems that are brought on by modernity? So going back to the beginning, we were hunter-gatherers for 3 million years as a species. And for all of this time, we got along without chairs. Hunter-gatherers, even today, have no furniture. It's too much trouble to drag around. So rather than furniture, our hunter-gatherer forebears adopted active rest postures. Our evolutionary comfort zone is really walking 5 or 10 miles a day, something that's extremely rare in modern America. But it was designed into our everyday life that we would get an immense amount of exercise. Interestingly, humans as a species are unique among our evolutionary cousins in our need for daily exercise. Bonobos, orangutans, chimps, all of our near cousins are quite happy lying around in a zoo or, cracking nuts all day and then climbing up in a tree to sleep at night. Humans, because of our hunter-gatherer ancestry, actually require quite a lot of exercise to keep our enzymatic systems working well, to keep our cholesterol down, keep our insulin down. It's odd that a chimp sitting around all day in a zoo can have a body fat content of about 11%, while humans, no matter how hard they try, have a difficult time getting below 20% body fat. The Hadza are a hunter-gatherer tribe in Tanzania and are perhaps a convenient window on our past. Here's a group of Hadza that are, and notice no furniture. Rather, they're all squatting, and they're quite comfortable squatting for, the length of a meal or the length of a long story. We modern Americans have pretty much lost the ability to squat, which was sort of a catastrophe. We were walking and squatting until about the 1600s, when most of Europe switched over from squatting to sitting. Initially, we were sitting on benches and tree stumps and the like, but 150 years ago, manufactured chairs became ubiquitous and inexpensive. And then about 100 years ago, we had this momentous shift in our daily behavior where all of the knowledge working population, office workers, began to sit, and they're sitting a lot, on average as much as 10 or 11 hours a day. This is far more than our anatomy and our physiology are expecting. So how is it working out for us? Well, humans and chairs have two problems when they try and coexist: back pain and death. How many of us has or will have back pain in the course of our lives, serious enough to seek the care of a physician or health practitioner? 8 out of 10. Back pain is almost universal. How many of us will die of heart disease? 1 in 4. And interestingly, mortality is doubled for those who sit the most. Here's a terrific paper from the Annals of Internal Medicine that was published a few years ago, looking at patterns of sedentary behavior and mortality in U.S. middle-aged and older adults. They followed quite a large population, over 8,000 participants in the study, and they were able to track movement using accelerometers. And they discovered that people who sat the most or sat for longer periods of time had mortality rates that were 20% higher than in people who sat less. So the conclusion of this study was that the total volume of sedentary time and the accrual of prolonged uninterrupted sitting bouts were associated with an increase in all-cause mortality, suggesting that we need to move more. This is a very good study from 2017 funded by the National Institute of Health. And here's a figure from the study. It's looking at 5 years of follow-up along the horizontal axis. And there are 4 groups that you see as lines going across the graph. Those who sat the most are in quartile 4, the broken and dotted lines. And you see that over the 5 years of follow-up, there was 9% mortality, whereas in those in the first quartile, the people who sat the least had mortality of about 1%. So these are not small differences that we're seeing. These are immense differences in mortality rate, again, based on just how much people were sitting. And I should underline that this is a very well done study because they were measuring sitting time by looking at data from accelerometers. So they had a moment-to-moment readout of whether people were sitting or walking. So this was a good study, but not a perfect study. Although it was prospective and they used objective data from accelerometers, it's an observational study, which is to say they were just watching how people did over time based on, and then looking at it through the lens of how much they were sitting. But because it's an observational study, it cannot establish causality, which is what we're really interested in. We want to know if sitting actually causes people to die sooner. And it's a big problem in epidemiology generally. The problem is called reverse causality. Reverse causality is it might be that people who are getting ready to die just don't move around very much, and so they're sitting more. So it might be that being close to death causes you to sit more, not that sitting more causes you to be more likely to die. It's a subtle, almost philosophical point, but it's very difficult to dissect this out. The authors of the study, to their credit, worked very hard with mathematical techniques to try and separate out and clarify the arrow of causality. And by using what's called a sensitivity analysis, they were able to pretty clearly show that it was sitting that was causing people to die, not that people who were about to die were sitting more. To really answer this question properly, we'd want a randomized controlled trial, but this is something we will never be able to get because no institutional review board will approve such a study for ethical reasons. Basically, you just as you can't assign a group of people to smoke, it's not ethical because it's not good for their health. Assigning a group of people to sit 10 hours a day wouldn't be considered ethical, and so the study couldn't be done. So here's another study from the Annals of Internal Medicine is entitled Patterns of Sedentary Behavior and Mortality in U.S. Middle-Aged Adults. And again, they concluded that there's no question that there was a tight association between mortality and sitting. It turns out that how long you sit has been validated as a cause of early death in not just the United States, but really around the world. Here's an article that was published not long ago in the American Journal of Preventive Medicine that looked at data from 54 countries worldwide, and they concluded that almost 4% of all-cause mortality was attributable to sitting. And the authors call for a reduced sitting time because it plays such a large role in mortality. So sitting is very strongly associated with dying. Not surprisingly, sitting shortens lives, but perhaps surprisingly, it shortens lives by as much as 2 years. This is a paper that was published in the British Medical Journal, one of the most prestigious journals in the world, actually. And they used a technique called cause-deleted life table analysis and found that the population would live on average 2 years longer if adults could limit their sitting time to less than 3 hours per day. It's a very tightly done study, and it's one thing to be able to detect a difference, but when you find a difference as big as 2 years, it really gets the attention of epidemiologists. So you might ask, how is it that sitting is causing lives to be shortened? Well, there are clear associations between sitting and obesity, diabetes, heart disease, and even some cancers. So the pathway that sitting causes increased mortality and shortened lives is pretty clear. So this epidemiology is always based on circumstantial evidence. What scientists really want, though, is the physiology that underlies the problem, that explains the mechanism by which sitting would cause increased mortality. The NHANES, the National Health and Nutrition Survey, is a big data set that's been maintained by the National Institute of Health here in the United States since really the 1960s. And they followed, they send out questionnaires every year to randomly selected populations that are about 10,000 people. And by asking after people's life habits and nutrition habits, they're able to make recommendations about how lives can be improved by changing our habits. In this study, they found that sedentary time was associated with increased high-density cholesterol and C-reactive protein, all of which cause inflammation and are part of the final common pathway of a number of problems, including heart disease. So this is the physiologic mechanism by which, one of the physiologic mechanisms by which sitting impacts our biochemical machinery. Here's another paper, this from the American Journal of Physiologic Circulation, looking at just the epithelia. The endothelium is what lines the blood vessels of the body, and by looking at the function of the epithelium and the veins and arteries in the lower extremity, two researchers, Padella and Fidel from the University of Missouri, were able to show that excessive time sitting reduced blood flow through the small vasculature in the legs, and concluded that this was likely the source of vascular disease that in later life would lead to arterial occlusion, requiring surgical correction and sometimes amputation. So although the changes in blood flow are slight, over months and years and decades of sitting, the damage to the endothelium of the leg vasculature can have profound health consequences. Perhaps more alarming is this paper from Circulation in 2017. It turns out that when people have a heart attack and heart muscle cells die because they've lost their blood supply, the dead heart muscle cells leak out an enzyme called cardiac troponin. And what this study found was that in people who sat for long periods of time, the levels of cardiac troponin rose, suggesting that there's a subclinical myocardial injury, damage to the heart muscle itself, that came from just the process of being sedentary. So, we've known that people who sit for long periods of time are more inclined to have heart disease, but this is the mechanism by which it occurs. It's actually damaging heart cells. So epidemiology gives us an idea of the size of the problem, which is 2 years of life lost on average. Physiology provides a plausible mechanism by which sitting causes changes in human physiology that would lead to disease and early death. And together they make quite a convincing case. Epidemiologists live for this kind of problem, because if you could add 2 years to the life of everyone in America, you're in line for a Nobel Prize. These are immense improvements. So it's not enough to identify the problem. We have to identify solutions. So what would the solutions be? Well, I'd like to hold that thought for just a minute and pivot to a second issue, which is back pain. Back pain is an immense problem in the United States. So I've mentioned 80% of Americans seek care for back pain at some point in their lives. And the overall cost to the American economy is over $100 billion a year. How is that even possible? Missed work, visits to the chiropractor, surgery gone wrong. Back surgery isn't always without complications, and once complications enter the picture, the cost of a procedure skyrockets. The incidence of back pain hasn't really changed despite 100 years of effort. And I think the reason is it's very hard to solve a problem that you don't understand. most back pain is what we call in medicine idiopathic, which means without a known cause. We doctors don't even know what it is that hurts. Is it the facet joints? Is it the intervertebral discs? Is it inflammation? It's not known. And worse, the mainstream medical community doesn't even seem to be curious about what causes back pain. The prestigious journal, The Lancet, published a study in 2018. Actually, the whole issue was devoted to the question of back pain. And they asked the question, what is low back pain and why we need to pay attention? And they conclude that low back pain is the leading cause of disability worldwide. But for nearly all people with back pain, it is not possible to identify a specific nociceptive cause. Nociception means pain. So in virtually all cases of back pain, we are unable to identify even what it is that hurts. It's very difficult to solve a problem, and if you don't understand what's causing it. And they go on to say, most episodes of low back pain are short-lasting with little or no consequence, but recurrent episodes are common, and low back pain is increasingly understood as a long-lasting condition with a variable course rather than episodes of unrelated occurrences. Which is to say, if you have back pain, you are likely to have back pain for your whole life that will wax and wane. This is discouraging news for people with back pain, because we would like to think of back pain as something like, I don't know, appendicitis, where you can remove the appendix and solve the problem. Back pain is a problem that we don't understand, and increasingly is understood as a lifelong problem that waxes and wanes. And it's immensely expensive in terms of dollars. As I mentioned, $100 billion a year, and not just in terms of money. Sometimes back pain is treated with narcotics, and this sometimes turns what is merely a problem into a catastrophe, the catastrophe of drug addiction. An uncomfortable problem, which is likely to be self-limited and transitory, can be converted to a potentially fatal condition, drug addiction. The idea that we can operate on back surgery is that we can operate on back pain has been less successful than we would hope by far. As a famous physician from the 20th century observed, there is scarcely any problem so grave that it cannot be made worse by surgery, which is to say, operating on a back pain that you don't understand runs the risk of making it worse with little likelihood of making it better. So while we don't really understand the etiology of back pain, our chair-centric culture seems to be at least part of the explanation. We spend a lot of time sitting, and cultures that don't spend time sitting don't seem to be plagued with the back pain epidemic that we suffer. Think of the Hadza in Tanzania. The solution to our addiction to sitting might be to go back to hunting and gathering, an unlikely solution, since there's no way the Earth can support 7 billion hunters and gatherers. But we could change how much we sit, we can change how long we sit, or we might change how we sit. Changing how much we sit seems straightforward, just tell people to sit less, but as we've discovered, our lives, our cultures, our jobs require that we sit, and that we sit a lot. So it's not going to be easy to get people to sit less. We've also tried to change how long people sit. We say, get up and take breaks. Don't sit for longer than 30 minutes. Take movement snacks, as they're now called in the epidemiologic literature. But again, it's hard to get people to leave where they are in their coding or where they are in their email and go for a walk just because the timer says it's time to go for a walk. So those solutions, while obvious and likely to be successful, turn out to be difficult to implement. As an epidemiologist, what we really want is a way to make it impossible not to act in a healthy way. And this would be changing how we sit. How do we get people to change anything they do? My mentor in epidemiology was Professor Susan Baker at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. And she beat into all of her students, the only way to do this is to make it impossible for people to do the wrong thing. Think of divided highways. We had an immense problem with highway deaths in the bad old days where cars would be passing each other at 60 miles an hour, inches apart, separated only by a painted line down the middle of the road. This was a catastrophe. And so the highway system was redesigned to have divided highways. So all the cars going in one direction were separated physically by a barrier from cars going the other direction. This cut highway deaths in half. Airbags, by having airbags in cars, people can't not participate. The airbag will be there when they need it, whether they want it or not. Same with seatbelts. By making the environment safer, we can keep a population safe. So the solution to the problem of sitting has to be baked into the built environment, which is to say, we need to change the way we sit. So this isn't a new idea. I certainly didn't think of it. And several solutions have been proposed. Kneeling chairs, the yoga ball, standing desks, treadmill desks. There's quite a long list of things that have been proposed. Kneeling chairs were proposed by Opsvik back in the 1970s. It was the first chair that was marketed as a computer chair, a chair that would let people sit still for long periods of time. And there's a lot to like about kneeling chairs. You can see from this picture in my slide that the hip angle is open. The angle between the spine and the femur is about 130 degrees. The weight-bearing surface is not just the ischial tuberosities, the sitting bones under her bottom, but also she's bearing weight on her tibial tuberosity on her knees. So the weight distribution is more even. And she's clearly going to have her knees lower than her hips. So that's a big advantage. The problem is it's very difficult to move once your knees are locked into a Balin's chair. And so the circulation in the lower extremity is constrained. So, and Balin's chairs have been around for, 50 years now and really haven't caught on. So I think it's unlikely that they're going to suddenly become popular because they make it so hard to move. The yoga ball was another obvious solution to get people to move more while they're sitting, because how could they not move? They're sitting on a yoga ball. But as you can see from this picture, it's possible to just slump into a yoga ball and sit quite still. So the hope that yoga balls would keep people moving turned out to be true, but only in a yoga studio where people are using a yoga ball as an exercise device. When people sit on a yoga ball, they pretty much just slump and stop moving. It has other problems. Because it's an inflated plastic ball made out of plastic that's not very expensive, all yoga balls will fail eventually. That is to say, the plastic will become brittle and the yoga ball will puncture. When that happens, anybody sitting on it will fall suddenly to the ground, and there have been serious injuries reported from yoga ball failures. So many institutions have banned the ball. So yoga balls seem not to be making the cut. And when people have studied yoga balls, they find that, here's a paper from Human Factors published in 2006. They find that prolonged sitting on stability balls doesn't greatly alter the manner in which an individual sits, but it appears to increase the level of discomfort. So when yoga balls have been studied by ergonomists with stopwatches and accelerometers, they seem not to be the success that everybody had expected. Standing desks seem like an obvious solution, because if sitting is bad, surely because standing is the opposite of sitting, it must be better. It turns out that standing isn't actually the opposite of sitting. People can stand quite still. And So really be as immobile as they are in chairs. Standing desks also aren't new. Early adopters were Hemingway and Churchill and many others. Interestingly, they adopted these because they had personal back pain problems. Back pain has been a problem for a very long time. There's several problems with standing desks. The first is that we know from my practice of surgery for many years, when people stand on assembly lines, blood pools in their legs because the right atrium has a column of blood that goes right down to the ankles. And if you stand still, if you're not walking, that blood dilates the veins in the lower extremities and can result in eventually incompetence in the valves in these veins that leads to varicose veins, which can be painful, get infected, inflamed, and even require surgical excision. So in the last century, for people on assembly lines who spent all day standing, we did a lot of varicose vein surgery. That's one downside of standing desks. But perhaps a bigger problem is the idea that standing desks would improve back pain. Well, here's a article from a ergonomics journal work from 2020 that looked into a meta-analysis, looking at all the studies that have been published about back pain and standing desks, and they come to the conclusion that replacing seated desks work postures with standing for a prolonged period of time would not be recommended because objectively measured prolonged standing postures during desk work did not significantly reduce low back pain compared to seated postures. So when carefully studied, the idea that standing would produce less back pain than sitting turns out simply to be wrong. And then there's this paper, which came out in the American Journal of Epidemiology in 2017. And really, it was a jaw dropper. Peter Smith and his group in Ontario studied almost 7,000 people over a period of 12 years. This is an immense study, huge by the standards of epidemiology. And they compared participants who spent most of their time standing as opposed to most of their time sitting. And they were looking at heart disease as an outcome. And they were stunned to discover that heart disease was actually twice as common in the group that stood rather than sat. We had believed that sitting was bad for your heart, but when it was carefully studied in over 12 years, we found that the rate of heart disease was actually higher for people who were standing rather than sitting. And you can tell from reading the discussion section of this paper that the authors were completely blindsided by this finding. They did not expect this at all. And as far as anyone can tell, it seems that standing induces stasis in the circulation of the lower extremity. As I've mentioned, the veins dilate, and there just isn't much. The veins have a hard time returning blood to the heart if you're not walking, because when you walk, the muscles squeeze the veins, and that pushes blood back to your heart. If you're standing still, the blood just kind of sits and dilates the vascular space and becomes slightly hypercoagulable. And if you have a rough spot in your coronary arteries, a state of slight hypercoagulability can result in a myocardial infarction, a heart attack. So this was a very troubling study to the authors. And the reflex to say, oh, well, if sitting is bad, standing is good. Well, you need to actually do the study to find what's true. And it turns out that standing actually is worse for your heart than sitting. So I've mentioned several times that our hunter-gatherer ancestors spent their time walking. So walking is the obvious thing to be doing rather than sitting. And so treadmill desks have been around for a while now. There's a picture here in my slide of kind of a petite treadmill desk that kind of checks all the boxes. It lets you walk while you're at your desk and on your phone. But my personal favorite for the treadmill discs is this one, which frankly admits it was derived from the gerbil run that we find in the rat lab for exercising rodents. This is a way to stay active in your tiny cubicle by making it possible to walk. So it seems like a good idea, but there are, of course, immediate problems. The first of all is that they're big and expensive, and that's already sort of a problem. But it also turns out that it's rather problematic to try and work while walking. Here's a paper that was published in PLOS One not long ago, cognitive and typing outcomes measured simultaneously with slow treadmill walking or sitting. And so in a careful study, they found that people actually had trouble listening and understanding what was being told to them, and they had trouble typing accurately. And if they had to walk more than 1 mile an hour, mousing accurately became more or less impossible. So the hope that we'll be able to walk while we're in our cubicle, it seems like that would be a simple solution, but in fact, when you try and operationalize the idea of a treadmill in the office, it doesn't work out very well. And we know this because big chair manufacturers like Steelcase introduced treadmill desks about 10 years ago and then quietly took them off the market about 5 years ago. It seems they just didn't stand the test of market. The marketplace didn't seem to have a place for treadmill desks. Last on this list is active chairs, which are sort of a new category, and it's so new that there are many different designs that you might not group together when you first see them. Here's a kind of a sampling of what's available. The one on the left is a chair by a company called Mishu in Germany. It's completely made out of wood, and it's got a rather elaborate rocking mechanism that's made out of wood. Doesn't really look much like an office chair, but it allows motion in all directions when you sit on it. The middle chair is from a Canadian company, Core Chair. It also allows a chair to move in all directions while sitting. And finally, on the right-hand side of my screen is a picture of a chair out of Germany called the Swapper. It's a kind of a stool on a post, and it can tilt on the base. And it has just a little bit of up and down action that you can see made possible by a large spring. So there are many of these designs, and they work with a variety of mechanisms. The mechanism on the left is from the patent diagram for the Core Chair that I showed in an earlier slide. The mechanism on the right is for a rather simpler design for another chair made by my company, actually. The underlying construct for active sitting is balanced sitting, which necessitates movement. By making the seat pan of a chair unstable, in order to stay seated, it's necessary to adjust your posture moment to moment, which results in continuous engagement of the core muscles. It's as though the spine was having a conversation with gravity. It doesn't have to be, in fact, you don't really need to consciously intrude on this conversation, but it's required to maintain posture. Interestingly, people automatically adopt an upright posture once they're sitting on an unstable surface. I think because they're able to explore a rather large number of different postures moment to moment until they settle into one that's congenial for their spinal musculature. As I said, it requires muscular engagement, which has a variety of salutary factors, because when muscles are engaged, they change the metabolic milieu of the body in a way that makes, it keeps people healthier by keeping their C-reactive protein down and their insulin down and their bad cholesterol down. A number of improvements are seen in serum chemistry when people are muscularly active. It also turns out that sitting actively increases metabolic rate by 20 or even 30%, which is Not a huge amount, but enough to make a metabolic difference in serum markers. Also, continuous motion of most of the joints of the body results in pumping synovial fluid through the joint space, and because cartilage doesn't have a blood supply, it gets its glucose and its oxygen from synovial fluid. So having joints move keeps the cartilage healthy. So I mentioned that active sitting increased the metabolic rate. Here's a paper from Ergonomics by Snar et al. From just a few years ago. And they found that caloric expenditure went up something like 20 to 40% when people were sitting actively. And this is the chair they were looking at, the so-called active balance chair that has a rounded base that tilts. And so to stay balanced, a person has to engage their core. The apparatus attached to her is a metabolic cart that measures the expired carbon dioxide and inspired oxygen and computes how many calories are being burned. So this is indirect calorimetry. That lets us see how metabolically engaged people are by changing the way they're sitting. This is a picture from the metabolic lab here at the University of Vermont with, one of our subjects, having their expired gases measured. And again, we find 20 or 30% increase in metabolic rate merely by staying balanced on an active chair. I say, 20 or 30% doesn't seem like a lot, but it turns out that it doesn't take a lot to make a big difference. This is a terrific study that I just love that came out of the UK back in about 10 years ago, where they happened to ask people if they were fidgeters or not. And it turns out that people who are admitted fidgeters have a decrease in all-cause mortality. These lucky people are naturally more muscularly engaged, basically in everything they do, and as a result, they get sort of the boost of a 20 or 30% metabolic increase, about what we get out of active sitting. So for people who are lucky enough to be natural fidgeters, the metabolic boost of active sitting may not be relevant, but for the rest of us, it's sort of like, facilitated fidgeting. So balanced sitting on an active chair definitely increases metabolic rate, which is likely to be helpful in decreasing sitting disease. Does it help back pain? We don't really know. We have anecdotal reports, but no published studies are available yet. And in part because pain is a difficult thing to study and because it would take a big study, which are necessarily expensive. So what's the future of balanced sitting? Well, it's hard to say, but interest is growing. Here's an ad with Justin Bieber pitching some active chair that's made in China, I think. Celebrities are hawking these things. And in case you missed it, there was a Super Bowl ad about active sitting. Which I'll try and show you here, but our web connection seems a little slow. Well, I'll just let that go and say it turns out that interest is growing to the point where there was even a Super Bowl ad. Yeah, there you go. A Super Bowl ad. So we know that there's interest because bigger established billion-dollar office furniture companies are buying up active sitting intellectual property and patents. Knoll acquired Fully, which was the company that had that Super Bowl ad, and then Herman Miller bought Knoll. So these companies are kind of sniffing around the concept of active sitting because, I don't know, they may think that they have to evolve or die. So to sum up, we're not designed to sitting, so we're not designed to sit. So sitting causes all kinds of mischief for us in terms of posture, in terms of pain, and in terms of metabolic disease. There's several proposed solutions: the wall, the standing desk, the treadmill. In this academic's opinion, active sitting, I think, is best of breed, but different solutions will work for different people. And as far as I can tell, the marketplace is still making up its mind. So sitting has changed over time and cultures, but evolution doesn't quit. You know, the Hadza spent their time, and all of our forebears for the first 3 million years spent our time in active rest postures, such as squatting. Then the Greeks and the Chinese, and finally Justin Bieber, kind of popularized the idea of sitting. But you wonder what comes next. You know, what is the future of sitting going to look like? One idea was the idea in Wall-E, a movie from, I don't know, a decade or two ago, about humans who became more and more sedentary until finally they couldn't move at all, completely supported every moment of their waking lives by their tech. And that seems a little far-fetched, but these are actual prototypes of chairs that really, well, the one on the left looks really more like a bed than a chair. No effort required. And these other conveyances not only eclipse any need for posture, but also any need for movement, because they take over that function as well. I think that the future of sitting ought to look more like this. Where the chair simply supports people and supports their natural inclination to move in all directions, to keep their spine limber and to keep their metabolic activity ticking over. So that's all I have for a presentation, but I'd be delighted to take any questions that might come up.
That's awesome, Dr. Turner Osler. Thank you very much. Super insightful. And I was here correcting my posture as you were talking about the different elements of this. Please, the audience, the attendees out there, please use this time to type in any questions you may have. We already have a couple sent in, so I'll start by we can tackle them one by one, Turner, if that's all right with you.
Sure, that'd be great.
Fantastic. So we have a question here that someone who has the Core 360 chair, they say they love it, but they do tend to slouch after sitting in it for a while, which she assumes is not the best thing to do. What is the best thing to focus on to avoid slouching?
So if you find yourself getting ready to slouch, you may have just reached as far as your conditioning allows you to go. So I think if you're tempted to slouch, the thing to do is to get up and go for a walk or lie down and take a nap. Over time, we find that almost everybody can sit all day long without slouching. Slouching is really when your postural muscles are crying uncle. That's all they're good for. But every day that you sit in an active chair, you're increasing your strength. And so we've got 83-year-olds that sit all day on our chairs, and I'm sure you can too if you just keep at it.
Fantastic. The next question we have here is, are there any do's or don'ts when buying an active sitting chair? And / what is the best thing to look out for?
Right. So it's hard because you can't give an answer that'll work for everybody. I think basically you just have to try things out. But what to look out for? Well, if it seems too good to be true, it probably is. You need to kind of not get too carried away. But I do think that active sitting can make a big difference for most people. And if I were kind of gonna give advice, I think I'd say, be sure you can send it back in case it doesn't work for you.
But is there, because you showed a few different examples of models and companies out there,
Uh-huh.
is there anything that an individual should be looking out for when trying them out, something to pay attention to? Because I'm assuming most of them will be pretty, difficult to get used to at first. So what are some maybe red flags to look out for?
Right. So the first thing is you want to be able to sit for just 15 or 20 minutes, maybe 30 minutes the first day, and see how it goes, because it's more work than you might think. So I would say whatever active chair you pick off of the web for whatever reason, you give it a while to try out before you come to any decisions, because as Danny suggests, it takes a little while to kind of get used to it. We find that we have about a 5% return rate. Most people like active sitting.
Great. Next question here is, what is the impact of sleep or sleep deprivation on a person's awareness of their posture and tendency to slouch?
No, that's a great question. I kind of think that if you're sleep deprived, you switch to survival mode, and you no longer have the energy to really sit well. So I mean, it's a whole nother topic, but one of the prerequisites for good health is getting enough sleep. Pure and simple. It keeps away so many problems, and Alzheimer's is the first on the list because it starts with A's. The humans are evolved to sleep, and the invention of the electric light gave us the misguided notion that we could get along without sleeping. And that was a terrible idea. It's another disease of modernity, really, the business of trying to avoid sleeping. It's absolutely required for the brain to regenerate itself and solidify memory. So I guess the answer is get enough sleep, and then active sitting will seem a lot easier.
Fantastic. Thank you. Another interesting one came in, and it is coming from an anonymous attendee, saying that he tried an active chair for about 10 minutes a couple of times. It made him dizzy. So each time he gave up, and he suffers from vertigo. So just inquiring to see if this is something that you've come across with at all.
Yeah, no, it's a pretty rare complaint, and we have a real interest in active sitting as possibly a treatment for vertigo, because it lets people expose their vestibular system to more stimulation. But it surely won't work for everybody, and there's no real research. So if it's not working, that's a good sign to send it. That's a good time to send your chair back to wherever it came from. It won't necessarily work for everybody. That said, it's a pretty rare complaint.
Okay. Next question here, and I'll throw a couple more at you, and then we'll close this and wrap this up. Is in the sitting position, is the position of the feet important at the ergonomic level?
Yeah, I think having your feet flat on the ground is very helpful, because your spinal reflexes are adjusting your spine's configuration in gravity, but it needs information to your spine requires information to get organized. Feeling where your sits bones are is extremely helpful, and where your pelvis is, but also you have an immense number of pressure sensors on the bottom of your feet. And by having your feet flat on the floor, you get a lot of information that your spine can use to organize itself in gravity.
Now
So it seems like a small thing to keep your feet flat, and it's not. You don't have to do that 24/7, but it does give more information to your spine as you're trying to optimize your posture.
Now we have a question come in seeking your opinion about something.
Sure.
Memory foam supported chairs or beds. What's your opinion on these?
I think memory foam is fine. I don't think there's anything special about it. I think what's important is that you not have so much foam that your ischial tuberosities can't get to some semi-firm surface so that they can feel a surface and get organized. So most people want at least some padding. The Presbyterians can sit, for hours on Sundays on oak without complaining, apparently. But most people want at least a little padding, but not so much padding that you can't feel your sitting bones and organize your posture. So memory foam is fine, just not too much of it. And there's nothing magic about it.
Dr. Turner Osler, thank you very much. It was a fantastic presentation. We have a few more inquiries here referring to the presentation, the ebook, and your email address. So anyone who registered for the webinar will receive an email with a download link to the book, the presentation, and the email address will be that's whether or not you decide to share it or not. But I'll leave that to you, Dr. Turner.
No, happy to share my email. I'm always happy to talk about this kind of stuff. I'm TOSLER for Turner Osler, TOSLER at UVM, Uniform Victor Mary, University of Vermont, UVM.edu. It's my emeritus professor account. I check it often.
Great. So we'll add it to the presentation and the email. So thank you very much, everyone, for attending. This is a first of many free 1-hour lunch break webinars hosted by NAT Global Campus. So please, to revisit these webinars, please head to www.neelasher.com, NIEL Asher, ASHER.com. And Dr. Turner Osler's podcast episode that we recorded earlier this morning will be released on all the podcast platforms, YouTube, and the website in the coming days. So very excited to release that. A more casual and extended version of what you've seen today, and a bit of Dr. Turner Osler's history as a trauma surgeon all around the country. So thank you very much, everyone. Have a lovely rest of your day.
Thank you, Danny. Oh. Oh.
Good, yeah, great. Might have been that as expected, what is happening? No, well done.
Oh, wow.
That was awesome.
It's over.